Friends, let's pick up the threads and in this GPET's 20th video, let's now consolidate because we are at an inflection point. G20 starts on 8th. Today is 6th. Today is Janmashtami also. And the Prime Minister has gone to Indonesia for the 43rd summit of ASEAN. Immediately after that will be followed the East Asia Summit, which is whole of ASEAN and 6 other countries. So it is called ASEAN plus 6. Now, we have discussed earlier, but I will briefly say which are the other associations, especially of the 21st century, which have been formed, and also from the mid-1950s after the Second World War, where United Nations got formed. It was dominated by USA because that was the only country which was not affected with fight on their land, while most of the European countries were, except those who were neutrals like Sweden and Switzerland, Finland. The others between the Axis powers and the Allied powers, Axis powers being Germany, Austria, and Italy, who in the end got defeated, and the Warsaw Pact countries, that is where they were led by Russian Federation, and they had formed a United Soviet Socialist Republic group, which were basically Eastern European countries plus the Russian Federation, and along with Georgia, which has become independent later on, or Ukraine. But so this was the United Nations at that time. A lot of African countries were not yet free. They became freer later on. Earlier, the UN started with a little less than 100 members, and then now it has about 200 members. They also set up some financial institutions under what is called Bretton Woods, which is the name of a place near New York. Bretton Woods Agreement established International Monetary Fund, which basically looked at monetary policies of different countries, and if they needed help, they could be given help by a mechanism of SDRs, special drawing rights. And its accompanying arm, World Bank, which is primarily using private capital to support the projects of various kind. So that is, we are talking about the history of late 40 and early 1950s. Unfortunately, the US got involved in new wars, first in Korea, 1951-2, and then in Vietnam, where France was the colonial power. And that diverted its energy. Though it had a Marshall Plan, it was named after Mr. Marshall, Secretary of State at that time, to support the European countries to come out of their devastation and so on. And that was a very nice input. To promote the employment and logistics in the US, Mr. Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, who was a general in the Second World War and then a president of the USA, started this massive program of roads linking throughout the US, which is a very large country. So it gave a lot of employment to the veterans who were coming back from the World War II, as well as a lot of other construction activity and so on. So that unemployment did not become a problem as far as US was concerned. And the Europe started rebuilding, so therefore the unemployment was not there. However, this did not happen much in the Warsaw countries because USSR did not have that much capital, and USA did not invest capital in the Eastern European countries at that time. Now, in the stage of the 50s, therefore, Europe recovered. US went ahead in science and technology. It had free hand, it had taxes, it was almost a monopoly. It was a hegemony in the world. And so the space program, the technologies relating to computers, biotech, etc., all started at that time. The real biotech application would come later. Now, looking at a country like India, we started with a democratic setup, while China in 1949, when it became free and People's Republic of China, started under the communist setup. Now, communist setup versus a democratic setup of comparable countries, comparable stage of economic development, was a toast for the US to say that the democratic institutions country will win out in the end. However, just after 5-10 years, the Japan will take a lead, which was quasi-democratic country, and China will start taking the lead. By 2000, China had taken a lot of lead over India, so we will start with the 21st century later on. So in the Europe, they felt the need of forming first a custom union for just two commodities, steel and coal, so that the prices would not vary that much. They will be able to organize the logistics of it and then set up power plants and for the construction. So it was an economic union only for two commodities. It was called steel community and the coal community. And then that will grow into a customs union where they dropped the customs duties on each other's products. And at that time, it started with 6 countries. At that time, about a dozen countries were there. You can say the better off ones, like Germany and France and UK and so on. UK will withdraw from this a few years ago. Now, that means 2021 under Mr. Bronson as the Prime Minister. Okay, now, so slowly this union grows. It has clear FTA agreement with other quote-unquote, you can say, white countries, which is USA, Canada, and Australia to begin with. Later on, Japan will get added and Korea will get added because they also progress. Now, with this harmonization, Europe started growing very well too. USA was growing well. Now, behind is coming Japan, who by the 60s was beginning to get ahead of American technology. If not American technology, but the manufacturing of it and the large numbers of it. Communications is one example, calculators is another example, and so on. And Hong Kong will take a lead in making small things like transistor sets and watches which have transistors in it and so on. So transistors started becoming available in the larger quantity. Prices went down according to the Moore's law. And these independent city-states, like Hong Kong and Singapore, following completely capitalist methodology, started growing, and they also became the financial centers and trading centers. For example, Singapore became center for oil refining and all that for the rest of the Asia also. Now, slowly, therefore, this European Union expands to about 40 countries as of now, and includes all the earlier Eastern European countries. Now, we have to remember that their GDPs are not very similar. GDPs of the first 6-7 countries are high, starting with Germany and France and with Spain at the bottom. Greece is, of course, going more bottom, and then the Eastern European countries who have had lesser GDP because their growth is few decades behind the others. Now, once they become like this, some of these cities, which were earlier also centers of finance, become more and more centers of finance, like Frankfurt, Paris, Geneva, Brussels, and London. And of course, in the US, they have New York and Los Angeles and few other places. And more centralization takes place as far as the finance capital is concerned. So anybody who wants capital has to access these capitals. Now, Japan first grows, and then the US in the 80s onwards starts putting sanctions on them, just like they are doing now on China and Russia. And what are these? It is that we will not give you this is a technology because it might have military uses, and that's very easy to say it has military uses because most of the electronics will find its use both in the civilian applications and military applications. So the communication industry of Japan, the calculator industry of Japan, TV industry of Japan, etc., started going down, and it started getting picked up by whom? By Korea. Korea is the erstwhile colony of Japan. And of course, it had been hammered from in the 50s by the US on one hand, and North Korea, which was supported by China, which is still true till today, because these two countries did not then join together at all. But Korea started picking up all these mass manufacturing things, and in many of those things, for example, Samsung is located there, Daewoo was located there, shipping and all that, but that particular group went down. Their model was the Zaibatsu model of the Japan, where large corporations supported by the government, supported by their own banks, etc., like we used to have monopoly houses earlier. Tatas would have a bank of their own, Birlas will have a bank of their own, etc. This is our 40s and 50s environment. Now, so that kind of manufacturing shifted to Korea, and China. Now, China being a large country itself, and many of these things, chota things, had been made in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong businessmen, who are Chinese, came to China in the close by provinces and set up huge plants. And there the marketing funda changed. The funda was that we manufacture for the world. We don't manufacture for just our own country. And our country may not be at that stage of the market development anyway. So then they will come later on. So today's issues of China are that as US and Europe say you go back home, that whether their own consumption increases. Like just as it happened in the case of Japan. So Japan accumulated a lot of money. They still have more than $1 trillion of their own excess money, their own excess foreign exchange in the American bond market. Similarly, Korea, and similarly, China. This is all above 1 trillion marks. And then Russia had 700 million or so. So now let's wrap it up here that the European Union grew, European economies grew, and Japanese economy grew, and then it came back to about 0% growth and also 0% interest rate. Now, this is something to be remembered. The interest rates in USA, Europe, Japan are 1% or less than that. So that means anybody investing there will have to be satisfied with 1%. But when they come to developing countries like India, they expect 10%, 15%, and so on. And sometimes they give the excuse that the value of the rupee goes down, but not really so, because they are going to get the money in dollars. So whatever the value is, they are going to get dollars. But their expectations from the Indian market, other developing country markets, Asian markets, African markets is 10 to 16%, and sometimes goes up to 32%, as it used to be on the credit and debit cards for your unpaid debt. Now, with this came number of other organizations. USA made a free trade agreement with Mexico, which is on its border. Large population, it was very large, and Texas states at some time used to be part of Mexico. There was a war, and the US forces won it. So Texas is a very huge state and very prosperous state. And the Canada. So these are the two free trade agreements and all that. And any disturbances, any changes which are now taking place vis-a-vis China are actually that there is more imports from Mexico and Canada, where the Chinese companies have put up their own factories. So technically, it's the Chinese sales which have gone down, or exports have gone down, but Chinese companies' exports from Mexico and Canada have gone up. So roughly it balances out. So this statement about we have put sanctions on China and they are working, is really not correct. However, while skipping X number of years before, but in 1970, President Nixon of USA went to China along with Mr. Kissinger, the Secretary of State of USA, Dr. Henry Kissinger. He's still alive at 100 plus. And they kind of opened up the Chinese market and dialogue and made them as a member of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, with the result that the Chinese import duties will go down, and of course US import duties will go down for them, and Chinese companies can export to USA and US companies can export to China, because it was called, and all the think tanks wrote about it, that China is a huge market. It is the biggest market because their level of development had also gone up. It was about 4 to 5 times in the early 2000s and about 2 times in 1971 of India. So therefore China and US became friends, and on the other hand, US increased the pressure on the Soviet Union, and 91 it finally broke, and the Eastern European countries became independent republics. Therefore, the market of Russia to that extent went down. But meanwhile, they had also discovered oil and gas, huge amounts of it in Siberia, very difficult terrain, and so on, and developed pipelines from there all the way to Europe. And then on the other side, there was one pipeline also, Siberia 1, going to Vladivostok port, and that could export to Russia or to China also. Now they are making Siberia 2 there, by the way. Okay, so Russia went down, but not really, because they were in direct competition with USA for science. And science costs a lot of money, especially space science costs a lot of money. Russian Federation became a very small size compared to USA in population, not in area, and also in terms of its budgets and revenues, etc., etc. But their oil revenues, diamonds, gold, other rare earth metals, uranium went up. So Russia was not admitted to European Union, but Turkey was. So Turkey is a member of the European Union. At this stage, let's break it up to say that what became the European Union also then became NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Association. Now, this was originally with the Western European countries, and you're talking about Atlantic, but here is USA sitting all the way 3,000 miles away, and then Canada, and then Australia, and now currently also Japan and Korea. So that means they're really not North Atlantic. They are a treaty of better off countries separately. Within that, they made G7, 7 countries, in which India and China are not part of it. So 7 Western countries, which are the leading economic powers. So basically, they tend to take their decisions and all that. They get reflected in the UN. And now, so what happens to these global South countries? Whatever, we will put a map also. It was most of Africa, most of Asia, China, Russia, India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia. They're all part of the global South. And this global South countries also have about 77 members. And in 1950s, they set up an organization of G77. Then later on, China joined to say call it 77 plus China, but that has been a little slower. So I was talking about the North America and South America. So there was a LAFTA agreement, the Latin American Free Trade Association, in which South America was there, and we had the free trade agreements with Mexico and Canada as far as USA is concerned. So these become then the associations, and US, of course, is the commonality in it. So it is a hegemon. All the international transactions mostly are done in dollar at that time. Now EU also, some small amounts in yen and